Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Rhetorical strategies in discourse analysis. Rhetorical strategies are techniques used in discourse to persuade, influence, or engage an audience. In discourse analysis, rhetorical strategies are studied to understand how speakers and writers use language to achieve specific communicative goals. These strategies include the use of appeals to logic, emotion, or credibility, framing, metaphor, repetition, and other linguistic tools that shape meaning, convey authority, and influence public opinion. Analyzing rhetorical strategies in discourse helps uncover how language constructs power dynamics, promotes ideologies, and shapes social interactions. Discourse analysis focuses on how rhetorical strategies are used in different contexts, such as political speeches, media, advertisements, and everyday conversation, to achieve particular effects. By studying how these strategies function, researchers can explore how discourse creates persuasive narratives, constructs identities, and reinforces or challenges social norms. Key rhetorical strategies in discourse analysis. Point 1. Ethos, appeal to credibility. Ethos refers to the strategy of establishing the speaker or writer's credibility, authority, or trustworthiness. This appeal is often used to convince the audience that the speaker is knowledgeable, ethical, and reliable, making their arguments more persuasive. Example: in a political speech, a candidate might highlight their experience and past achievements to build ethos. Phrases like, "as someone who has served this country for 20 years, or, "I've always stood up for the working class," position the speaker as an expert or as someone who shares the audience's values. Discourse analysis would explore how ethos is constructed through language and how it enhances the speaker's persuasiveness. Point 2. Pathos, appeal to emotion. Pathos involves appealing to the audience's emotions, such as fear, hope, anger, or compassion, in order to persuade them. Emotional appeals are used to evoke feelings that align with the speaker's or writer's message and motivate the audience to take action or adopt certain viewpoints. Example: in humanitarian campaigns, pathos is often used to inspire compassion. Descriptions of suffering children or communities affected by disaster, combined with images of distress, are designed to evoke empathy and encourage donations or support. Discourse analysis would examine how language, imagery, and emotional cues work together to influence public sentiment and behavior. Point 3. Logos, appeal to logic. Logos is the rhetorical strategy of using logical arguments, facts, statistics, or evidence to persuade the audience. By presenting clear reasoning and reliable data, speakers and writers build a logical case that appeals to the audience's sense of rationality. Example: in a debate about climate change, a speaker might present scientific data showing rising global temperatures and increased carbon emissions to support the argument that urgent action is needed. Discourse analysis would focus on how these logical appeals are structured and how they contribute to the speaker's overall argument. Point 4. Framing. Framing refers to how information is presented or structured to shape the audience's perception of an issue. By framing issues in particular ways, speakers or writers can emphasize certain aspects while downplaying others, influencing how the audience understands and responds to the topic. Example: in media discourse, a government's budget cuts might be framed as necessary fiscal responsibility or as harmful austerity measures, depending on the political stance of the publication. Discourse analysis would explore how framing influences public perception and aligns with different ideological positions. Point 5. Metaphor. Metaphor is a rhetorical device that compares two unlike things, often to help the audience understand complex or abstract concepts through familiar terms. Metaphors shape how we think about and interpret issues by highlighting certain similarities or qualities between the two compared items. Example: in political discourse, the economy might be described as a machine that needs to be repaired or fine-tuned. This metaphor suggests that the economy is something technical that can be controlled or fixed by experts. Discourse analysis would examine how metaphors like these influence the audience's understanding of economic issues and policy solutions. Point 6. Repetition. Repetition is a rhetorical strategy used to emphasize key points, making them more memorable and reinforcing the message. By repeating certain words, phrases, or themes, speakers or writers create a sense of importance and urgency around specific ideas. Example: in Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, the repeated use of the phrase, "I have a dream," reinforces the central message of equality and justice, creating a powerful emotional impact. Discourse analysis would focus on how repetition helps build momentum and strengthens the overall persuasive effect of the speech. Point 7. Polarization. Polarization is a strategy that creates a stark division between two opposing groups or ideas, often framing one as morally superior and the other as undesirable or dangerous. This rhetorical tactic simplifies complex issues and encourages the audience to take sides. Example: in populist rhetoric, leaders often polarize the discourse by framing the struggle as between the people and the corrupt elite. Discourse analysis would examine how this language creates a clear division and mobilizes public support by appealing to feelings of alienation and dissatisfaction with the status quo. Point 8. Rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are questions posed by the speaker or writer that do not require an actual response, but rather encourage the audience to think critically or reflect on a particular issue. This strategy is often used to lead the audience toward a desired conclusion. Example: a politician might ask, "Do we really want to leave our children a world of pollution and climate disasters?" to persuade the audience to support environmental reforms. Discourse analysis would explore how rhetorical questions guide the audience's thinking and push them toward specific conclusions. Point 9. Anecdotes and personal stories. Using anecdotes or personal stories is a rhetorical strategy that humanizes abstract issues by providing real-life examples. This approach makes arguments more relatable and emotionally resonant, often bridging the gap between facts and the audience's lived experiences. Example: in healthcare debates, a politician might share a story about a family who struggled to pay for medical treatment, using this example to argue for reform. Discourse analysis would examine how personal stories serve to evoke empathy, illustrate broader societal issues, and strengthen the speaker's argument. Point 10. Parallelism. Parallelism involves using similar grammatical structures in a series of related phrases or sentences, creating a rhythm and reinforcing the speaker's message. This strategy is often used to emphasize key points and make the discourse more persuasive and memorable. Example: in John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, he famously used parallelism with the phrase, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." Discourse analysis would examine how this parallel structure heightens the rhetorical impact and inspires the audience to take action. Methods for analyzing rhetorical strategies in discourse. Point 1. Critical discourse analysis, CDA. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, is a key method for examining how rhetorical strategies function within larger systems of power and ideology. CDA looks at how language, through rhetorical techniques, reinforces or challenges dominant social and political structures. Example: a CDA of political speeches during elections might reveal how rhetorical strategies like ethos, pathos, and framing are used to construct authority, appeal to emotions, and shape public opinion on key issues such as immigration or healthcare. The analysis would explore how these rhetorical strategies reflect and perpetuate power relations. 2. Rhetorical analysis. Rhetorical analysis focuses on identifying and evaluating the rhetorical strategies used in a text or speech. This method breaks down the use of ethos, pathos, and logos, as well as other rhetorical devices, to understand how the speaker or writer achieves persuasion. Example: a rhetorical analysis of Greta Thunberg's climate activism speeches would examine how she uses emotional appeals, pathos, to evoke a sense of urgency and fear about climate change, logical arguments, logos, to present scientific evidence, and her moral authority, ethos, as a youth leader to bolster her credibility. Point 3. Metaphor analysis. Metaphor analysis explores how metaphors are used to shape understanding and interpretation of complex issues. This method is especially useful for uncovering how metaphors frame particular ideologies and guide the audience's conceptualization of abstract concepts. Example: in analyzing economic discourse, metaphor analysis might reveal how the economy is consistently framed as a living organism that needs to be nurtured or grown, reflecting an ideology that prioritizes economic development and expansion. The analysis would explore how these metaphors influence public perceptions of economic policy. Point 4. Framing analysis. Framing analysis investigates how rhetorical strategies are used to frame issues in specific ways, influencing how the audience perceives a topic. This method looks at which aspects of an issue are emphasized and which are downplayed to shape public opinion. Example: in debates over gun control, framing analysis might reveal how pro-gun advocates frame the issue in terms of individual freedom and self-defense, while gun control advocates frame it as a matter of public safety. Discourse analysis would explore how these frames align with different rhetorical strategies to persuade audiences. Examples of rhetorical strategies in discourse analysis. Example 1. Barack Obama's 2008 victory speech. In his 2008 victory speech, Barack Obama used a range of rhetorical strategies, including ethos, establishing his credibility as a leader, pathos, appealing to emotions like hope and unity, and repetition, repeating phrases like, "Yes, we can." Discourse analysis would focus on how these strategies contributed to Obama's ability to inspire a sense of optimism and collective action, positioning him as a unifying figure during a time of economic crisis and political division. Example 2. Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric. Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric during the 2016 U.S. presidential election frequently used polarization, metaphor, and repetition. He framed the political landscape as a battle between the people and the corrupt elite, positioning himself as an outsider who would drain the swamp. Discourse analysis would explore how Trump's rhetorical strategies resonated with voters by tapping into feelings of disillusionment, anger, and alienation. Example 3. Environmental advocacy discourse. In environmental advocacy, rhetorical strategies such as pathos, emphasizing the emotional impact of environmental degradation, logos, presenting scientific data on climate change, and metaphor, describing the Earth as our home, or a fragile ecosystem, are commonly used to persuade the public and policymakers to take action. Discourse analysis would focus on how these strategies are employed to frame environmental issues as urgent and morally significant. Example 4. Social media activism, e.g., #MeToo. The #MeToo movement employed rhetorical strategies such as pathos, sharing personal stories of trauma and survival, repetition, the widespread use of the hashtag, and ethos, amplifying voices of survivors to establish credibility. Discourse analysis would explore how these strategies help the movement gain momentum, shift public discourse on sexual harassment, and lead to tangible changes in social and legal frameworks. Challenges in analyzing rhetorical strategies in discourse. Point 1. Context dependence. Rhetorical strategies are highly context dependent. The effectiveness of a strategy such as emotional appeal or framing can vary based on the cultural, political, or social context in which it is used. Discourse analysts must consider these contextual factors to avoid misinterpreting the impact of a rhetorical strategy. Point 2. Subtlety of influence. Some rhetorical strategies, especially those related to framing or ethos, may exert influence in subtle ways that are difficult to detect without a deep understanding of the discourse's broader context. Discourse analysts must be attuned to these subtleties and carefully examine how they operate within the text. Point 3. Multiple strategies at once. Speakers and writers often use multiple rhetorical strategies simultaneously, which can make it challenging to isolate and analyze each one. Discourse analysts must account for how these strategies interact to create a persuasive or influential message. Conclusion. Rhetorical strategies are central to how language functions in discourse, shaping how messages are constructed, communicated, and received. Discourse analysis of rhetorical strategies reveals how appeals to emotion, logic, and credibility are used to persuade audiences, how issues are framed, and how metaphors and repetition reinforce key ideas. By examining rhetorical techniques in various contexts, from political speeches to social movements, discourse analysts can uncover how language influences public opinion, constructs identities, and reinforces or challenges social power. Whether analyzing campaigns, activism, or media, rhetorical strategies are essential for understanding the persuasive power of language in society. Frequently asked questions. What are rhetorical strategies in discourse analysis? Rhetorical strategies are techniques used by speakers or writers to persuade, engage, or influence an audience. In discourse analysis, these strategies are studied to understand how language is used to achieve specific goals, such as constructing arguments, shaping public opinion, or reinforcing power dynamics. What is the role of ethos in discourse analysis? Ethos is the rhetorical strategy of appealing to credibility, where a speaker or writer establishes themselves as trustworthy, knowledgeable, or ethical to persuade the audience. Discourse analysis looks at how language, past achievements, or authoritative positions help build ethos and increase persuasiveness in texts such as political speeches. How does pathos influence public sentiment in discourse? Pathos appeals to the audience's emotions, such as fear, hope, or empathy, to persuade them. Discourse analysis focuses on how emotionally charged language, whether through narratives, metaphors, or imagery, shapes public sentiment and encourages action, especially in political campaigns or social movements. How is logos used as a rhetorical strategy? Logos refers to the appeal to logic, where speakers use data, facts, and reasoning to build a rational argument. In discourse analysis, logos is examined to see how logical structures, evidence, and clear reasoning are employed to strengthen arguments, such as in debates about policy or science. What is framing in rhetorical discourse? Framing is the strategic presentation of an issue in a way that highlights certain aspects while downplaying others. Discourse analysis of framing reveals how the same issue can be presented differently to shape the audience's understanding, influencing their perception and attitudes toward it. How are metaphors analyzed in discourse? Metaphors compare two unlike things, helping audiences understand complex ideas through familiar terms. Discourse analysis examines how metaphors, like describing the economy as a machine, influence the way audiences conceptualize abstract or technical issues, making them more relatable or persuasive. Why is repetition important in rhetorical strategies? Repetition reinforces key points and makes ideas more memorable by emphasizing certain words, phrases, or themes. Discourse analysis looks at how repetition, such as Martin Luther King Jr.'s repeated use of "I have a dream," strengthens the message and builds emotional or persuasive power. What role does polarization play in discourse analysis? Polarization simplifies complex issues by dividing them into two opposing sides, often framing one as morally superior. Discourse analysis explores how polarization creates divisions, such as us versus them, narratives in populist rhetoric, and mobilizes support by intensifying emotional responses. How are rhetorical questions used in persuasive discourse? Rhetorical questions prompt the audience to reflect, often guiding them to a particular conclusion without requiring an answer. In discourse analysis, rhetorical questions are studied for how they shape the audience's thinking and subtly push them toward agreement with the speaker's viewpoint. How do anecdotes and personal stories function as rhetorical tools? Anecdotes and personal stories make abstract issues more relatable and emotionally resonant. Discourse analysis examines how these narratives humanize arguments, evoke empathy, and help audiences connect with broader social or political issues, such as in debates about healthcare or justice.